Now, I will say from an environmental impact standpoint, there are some very good and compelling arguments to consume meat that's been pastured a certain way. That is to say, high density grazing with rotational, frequent rotation and movement of the cattle. That has a very beneficial effect on the diversity of the land, soil carbon sequestration, and so it's a net positive. It's interesting, there's a professor, Alan Williams, who's calculated that if we can convert, again, in the United States, around 30% of our cattle ranches to rotationally grazed, high-dense grazed cattle, we can offset all of the carbon emissions in the United States, everything. That's energy, that's transportation, that's industry sector, just by moving those cows onto the land.
So a more efficient use of that land.
Yeah.
Because you're touching on the argument that cattle ranching basically has high carbon emissions, right? That's what's being called out. That was in, what was the movie? Cowspiracy. They went big on that, right? And they went heavy on it's hurting the environment, which is just another thing for the vegans or certain people to talk about. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so if we look at what's currently being claimed. So right now, based on a 2006 study called Livestock's Long Shadow, they calculated that cattle emit 18% of worldwide greenhouse gases. Now, they corrected that number down to 14.5 because of a guy named Frank Mitlotter, who's out of UC Davis, and he said, hey, look, you're doing a life cycle assessment. You're not measuring direct emissions, and so they correct that number down, but the true number is 5%. So 5% of worldwide emissions are coming from livestock in general, cattle making up about 60% of that. They didn't, and they said 14% comes from the transportation industry and 14% come from cows. The transportation industry, they didn't do life cycle emission. They just looked at the tailpipe. So if they would compare tailpipe emissions from a car versus burps from a cow, it would be 14% for the car, 5% for the cows. But since they didn't do that, it's an apples to oranges comparison. Now, the other thing that's important about that is the 14% is a worldwide global number. And so I live in the United States, you live in the UK. In the United States, cows are responsible for 2% of our greenhouse gas emissions because we have so much other emissions. Now, if you're in Botswana, right, cows are producing a lot because there's nothing else there. There's nothing to compete with. So using worldwide numbers to dictate policy in the UK and the United States, this doesn't make sense. If every single person in the United States went vegan and we got rid of all the cows, we slaughtered all the cows and all the chickens and all the pigs and all the sheep and all the cats and dogs, the worldwide difference in greenhouse gas emissions would be less than 1%. That's every single American giving that up. So is it worth it? Clearly not. And what would the negative impacts be? Nutrient deficiencies for many people. You would have to consume more calories, so we would have to produce more calories. More monocropping, which is degradative to the land, so it's destroying the soil. So it's not a solution. Veganism, worldwide veganism, will never work.